All right, so we just had part one from accidental admin to innovative operator. So we're going to continue into part two. So again, we're going to have Mary Keene take us on our adventure today, as she is a 3-time Salesforce certified revenue operations leader with over 10 years experience. She's a Salesforce customer experience ambassador, a trailhead ranger, and a rad woman grad. I have some of her connections. I'm going to go ahead and paste into the chat. So be sure to connect with her on LinkedIn and in the trailhead. I think she said she already noticed some people connected with her from the first one. So awesome, keep it coming. So quick recap of what we covered in the first portion. Mary went over an overview of the integration, the pre-setup steps, including presets, which comes from my session before this, and then triggers with the components and presets. So in this second portion, we're going to be covering the life of a call. So really diving into the events that take place during that call. And then Mary's going to lead us through the top ways to avoid the common mistakes, and so that we can find a success with CTM and Salesforce. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Jess. Before diving into avoiding common mistakes with our triggers for Salesforce, I wanted to first talk about what happens during a phone call. I tried to think of a very simple example beyond just a missed call so that we could take a look at what really makes a phone call. The first thing that came to mind was a common scenario here at CTM, especially during the holiday season. We receive many callers looking to track their packages with their tracking number. So you can imagine why we get these calls. So here we have an example of a conversation between a CTM agent and a caller looking to track their package. Jess, you want to be the caller? Ring, ring.
Ring, ring, ring.
CTM, how can I help you?
Hi, I would like, sorry, I messed up my lines. Hi, I need some help tracking a package. Do you need my tracking number?
I'm sorry, we don't offer that service. We're a software company that helps businesses track their phone calls.
What? Oh, I must have the wrong number. Thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks, Jess. So that was a pretty simple and straightforward call, right? Let's take a look at what happened during the phone call. So I want to talk about what most people think of as a phone call. So if we look at this phone call, you'll see that there's a series of events that happened. And take it from the top. So the caller dialed CTM's main phone number. CTM routes to a voice menu, prompting the caller to make a selection. The caller presses 1 for sales. CTM collects the input and routes the call to the sales queue. It's offered to multiple agents. The agent answers the call. There's some dialogue. The caller then hangs up, and then the agent scores the call and dispositions it as a wrong number. Okay, so now that we know the events that happened during the call, we have all of the pieces and should be able to set up a Salesforce trigger to gather all of this data and send it to your instance, right? Not so fast. So I want to take a look at what actually happens. There's so many things that happen during the life of a phone call. I think many of our customers and really most people in the world think of a phone call as the moment the call is answered to the moment that it is terminated. However, that's really not the case, especially with CTM. You'll notice some differences here in this slide compared to the last one. So between the caller dialing our number and CTM ringing the agents, things like the smart router are making dozens of conditional decisions around this activity to decide if the caller should be presented with that voice menu or if they should be routed to another destination. These are things that are often overlooked when the average person thinks about a call being routed. In addition to this, there's things that are happening after the call is over, such as the recording processing, which is after that transcriptions then are generated. and so on. So I would highly recommend to all of our customers that are building or plan to build triggers to review the flow panel within the activity log. This is a super handy tool when it comes to building your triggers and understanding the different events that are happening so that you can include these in your logic. So now that we know our trigger components and the events that happen during a phone call, I wanted to talk about some of the most common mistakes that we see so that you can avoid these pitfalls. So timing. This is probably the most common issue that we see. When you think about the life of a phone call, you can understand that there are so many things going on. Agents are collecting information, we're updating records. We have things that are happening before a call is answered. We have things after the call is terminated and so on. So common mistakes that we see. We see many tickets for our customers that have Salesforce triggers running at the start of a call. Typically, these are problems that are around like missing or incorrect data. Where are you going to see these? Typically you're not going to see them in your integration logs because there isn't an error. CTM has the data and we're able to send it. However, it's just not what your team is looking for. So why is that? An example that comes to my mind is that if we're creating an activity at the start of a call and you want to see the call status, we're going to log in progress because the call is never going to be answered at the start of a call. Chances are you want to know the outcome of a call and not see a report that shows all of your activities are in progress. So how do we fix this? The first place is to understand when a phone call truly starts. The true start is when the caller's carrier makes a connection to our network. We typically don't recommend creating Salesforce triggers for the start of a call because we have limited information at that time. And we've learned that there's so much more data that our customers are expecting at the true start of a call. So our recommendation for this one is to think about the data and like when you really need it. If you need an activity created at the start of a call, that's fine. We're just going to recommend that you add an additional trigger for the end of a call, maybe with a delay, that will update the original activity that CTM created. We also have the option to run triggers only after all data is collected, and you're going to see this in the first step of the trigger setup. So let's talk about lead and activity ownership in Salesforce. We frequently get the question, why is this one user the owner of everything and not the agent who answered the call? Anytime our team asks me this, I just cut them right off before they can even finish the question because I know the answer. So this isn't something that you're going to see in our error logging either because there's not really an error. The issue is that the call isn't answered at the start. So there isn't an assigned agent, and we're going to assign the record to the integration default owner. So you can see why creating records at the start of a call is tricky. For a solution, I'd recommend changing the trigger to be when a call is answered. So let's move on to some of the Salesforce specific issues that we frequently encounter. Lead conversion. Lead conversion can impact CTM's ability to update records. It's incredibly common to convert a lead to a contact during the course of a phone call. And if you ever see the error cannot reference converted lead, this means that you don't have contact mapping set up. And luckily, this is a super easy fix. Just add contact mapping to your triggers. All right, so records aren't popping. We're commonly asked why my records aren't popping when I answer the phone. Again, this isn't something that you're going to see in the error log because there isn't really an error. So we'd recommend reviewing your soft phone settings within Salesforce. You can check to see which objects were popping and select the objects that you want us to present to your agents. And we do have the navigation for you right here. Now, it might seem silly to mention required fields because they're pretty commonly used within Salesforce, but we still do see tickets for this. If you're ever unable to create or update a record, it could be due to a required field. So if you check your error logs in CTM, you might see something like required fields are missing, and then they'll have like the name of the field in there, and it can vary. So luckily, this is also an easy one. You'll be able to see which required field is missing based on the error message. And in the event that the error doesn't say a specific field, you can check which fields are required within Salesforce and compare this with your own object field mapping within CTM. So no update. If you ever see the message not found, the requested resource does not exist in your error logs, then you should know that this means we're failing to update a record that we were previously linked with. The reason for this is that the record was deleted. So something like an opportunity, or if you think about leads, the lead record could have been merged. And when you're merging records, one is retained and one is deleted. So that's why we're not able to access the resource. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that we can do when something has been like merged or deleted. So depending on the scenario, one option would be to use found instead of linked, if just in case you're running into this frequently. Duplicates. Duplicates, this is something that all Salesforce users across the world run into in some capacity, and our integration and our customers are also no stranger to this. When CTM tries to create a new lead or a contact record, Salesforce will respond to us basically just saying no. You'll see this in your error log, something like you're creating a duplicate record. We recommend you use an existing record instead. At that point, CTM can't continue with the record creation because, again, Salesforce is telling us no. So a way around this is to have a designated integration user and then add a filter within your duplicate rules to exclude the integration user. So the possibilities. We've talked exclusively about calls, but we haven't talked about forms, SMS messages, and chat. So you can have different triggers for these with different actions and mappings. For example, a phone call isn't going to have a message body like a text message will. So you would need to create different mappings for this, so different triggers. Another thing you can do is you can route a call through a Lambda. And you can use the Lambda to query Salesforce for owners. And if there's a field on the Salesforce object like territory, we can check this, and based on the response we get from the Lambda, route the call to the appropriate destination. We also have customers that use this with our smart dialer. They upload a list of contacts. Then the Lambda looks up the Salesforce owner, but before the smart dialer dispatches the call, pardon me, you'll upload a list of contacts, and then the Lambda is going to check the Salesforce owner before dispatching the call. That way we're only dispatching the calls to your record owners. If you have a challenge or an idea for your Salesforce integration, talk to your account manager and the possibility of professional services for custom triggers built just for you and your business's needs. Setting your team up for success. This is so important. We do have some recommended best practices for you. We would recommend building in a test environment. If your CTM plan includes Salesforce, the Salesforce integration, then you will have access to create an unlimited amount of sub accounts, and it's recommended to create a sub account for testing purposes. I mentioned earlier that CTM doesn't offer sandboxes, so you could just create a sub account and then link that with like a sandbox within Salesforce. So build and test your triggers in a new CTM sub account linked with a sandbox environment in Salesforce, and then you'll be able to identify any issues without affecting your production data. We also recommend testing as many permutations of your triggers as you can. As with all customizations in CTM and Salesforce, it's important to test your work. All calls have a beginning and an end, but what happens in between, before and after, can vary. So make sure to test as many possibilities as you can think of. If you attended the Making Sense of a Messy MarTech stack earlier this week, then you might recognize a few of the next items for success. So documentation is key. I think it's easy to get excited about completing something and wanting to move on to the next project, but your work really isn't any good if processes and expectations are unclear. So when it comes to documentation, just do it because it's critical. Involving stakeholders and defining workflows and processes. It can be best to involve the team. That way they're in the loop. They're going to contribute great ideas you haven't thought of. And this always makes for the best adoption because it's presented early, it's a conversation, and then its arrival is expected and more easily implemented. Also establish an escalation and feedback loop. It's important for the team to have a voice in their work and their workflows. And it's important for you to understand the pain points and also the fantastic ideas that they have. Something I talked about in the Messy MarTech presentation is that there's real people at the center of all of these processes. So the relationships we have with them can make or break our success. So trust is going to be critical. When you're in the moment with the team, it just goes such a long way for you. And you can do this just through regular communication. So when you think about working with your team, I think having like basically some kind of like feedback loop is critical, because then you're going to start to build like the sense of you're in it with them during the quarter, instead of just telling them what their goals are and like where they finished. So always involving the team is important. Additionally, this is going to allow you to identify and resolve issues sooner, which helps continue to build trust, and you're seen as a true partner in the process. You know, even though you might be working in Salesforce, it doesn't mean that you're working in Salesforce the same way as your end users. So it's important that they're involved and that they have a way to communicate with you. I know that when our team comes to me with a problem, they kind of approach like, I'm sorry to bother you with this. And I'm like, oh, thank you so much for telling me. Don't ever say you're a bother, because you're not. So moving on, power users and champions. These are so super helpful. They're great for testing, and they're also great for helping the team when you're not available. So definitely utilize power users and champions. Train the trainer goes a long way too. I think it goes hand in hand with power users and champions. Salesforce, for some roles, that's what you're working in all day, every day, 100%. Other users, maybe you're an accidental admin and Salesforce might just be a fraction of your responsibilities. So sometimes you need to take off and you need somebody who's going to be available to help when you're not there. So I would recommend training the trainer. Knowledge is power, and when you spread it around, it makes everybody that much more successful. What's in it for me? This is a Salesforce acronym, I believe. Everybody in the room might be familiar with it if you're in the Salesforce community. When the what's in it for me is understood by everyone, it leads to better alignment, better data capture, and then the importance of clean data is better understood, and it ultimately becomes the culture. So when you follow CTM's best practices, you'll see the impact on your organization. You're going to have better user adoption. Processes will become standardized and more easily implemented. Data quality is going to improve over time. And then all of this will help drive the right behaviors to achieve your KPIs. And with that, that's a wrap on part 2 of our triggers.
Great, thanks. That was so informative, Mary. And we have questions for you. So, okay, we've got a couple of them. Okay, so here's the first one. What is the best practice for syncing data one way versus two ways? For example, I have a life cycle field on my contact in Salesforce and I want to route calls. Does it make sense to push that to CTM versus having CTM look for it when a call comes in?
Sorry, I'm just rereading it. What are the best practices for syncing data one-way versus two-way? That's a good question. So I'm not sure if I'm going to know how to answer that one off the top of my head. I think when I think about mapping fields to Salesforce and I'm working with multiple systems, typically what I do is I kind of think about like what I want to be as my source of truth and what should override like each system. So in our case, what we do is like if a field has a value in it, we don't overwrite it unless it's like certain things that were kind of, maybe it's changed. But in terms of pushing it to CTM versus having us look for it, I think we would need to have more context around that. And that's something that, you know, we'd be happy to follow up with you on.
Great. So there's a few more for you. One is, can you explain what a Salesforce monitor is?
Yeah, so a Salesforce monitor is going to be something where like we're linked to a record and basically we're waiting for Salesforce to inform us that something has changed so that we can take an action or we can update a field within the call log. Yeah.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I've got another, there's a couple more for you. So this one might be an easy one. So how do we learn more about lambdas? And are there templates for getting started with Salesforce? So I know we have templated or presets of Salesforce and triggers, but I'm not sure about lambdas.
Yeah, lambdas is a little bit out of my wheelhouse because I think that's kind of more like an AWS service. So I would recommend checking out like Amazon's website and looking for where to get started. I know Salesforce also has some AWS like Lambda trailheads on or like trailhead modules on Trailhead. So definitely check those out. I think I have them on my list of to-dos. So
yeah, and you could also check out our API office hour that our devs offer. So that's on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern. So with those, you can bring questions about lambdas. And then if you have one, they'll look at them, but they're not going to actually help you build them there. So that might be a good place to start.
Mm-hmm. And then templates for getting started with Salesforce, is that related to the Lambda or is that just related to CTM? Because within CTM, we do have the presets that we covered briefly in part one. And that's kind of almost like a template where, you know, it's a great, I think of it as like a foundation. It's like, here are some of the most commonly worked with objects. And so we have some of those actions already set up for you, but every business is different and your logic's going to be different. The needs are going to be different. Your teams work differently. So I think of the presets as a foundation, and then you can supplement that with additional triggers to meet your business's needs.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have another question, and this is all from the same person. So thank you for bringing the questions. We appreciate them. They say, I have a contact sequence for new leads. For example, 3 calls over 3 days. We currently execute that with tasks in Salesforce, and then the agent clicks the call. I'm wondering if we should be using CTM's outbound or using a CTM outbound dialer campaign. Is there a best practice for using the dialer campaigns in Salesforce?
I think that doing any kind of best practices around that, I'm not sure. I think that's something that our professional services team would really be able to give you better guidance on, because they work with so many different types of businesses, and depending on like what industry you're in, they're going to be able to tell you like, you know, probably like what some of your competitors or other folks in that vertical are doing. So I would definitely reach out to your account manager and maybe set up a call and talk with them about it.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Mhm.
All right, if we have any other questions, please enter them into the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll be happy to address them. All right. Any last little nuggets of wisdom you would like to share, Mary?
Trailhead is awesome. Our knowledge base is great. Go to Jess's live academy trainings. They are fantastic. She puts a ton of work into them, keeps them up to date. Our team regularly attends them no matter how many times they've watched them because they're that good. So check out Jess's training series for sure.
Oh, thanks. They start next week on Monday.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed today's session, you found it useful, let us know in the comments or in the survey, because we can definitely start doing more sessions like this.
Yeah. So speaking of the survey, if you guys wanted to leave us some feedback, which we would love to hear, we always aim to improve. This is our second annual. So as we think about doing this next year, give us some feedback, let us know how we can improve. We really value your feedback. So thank you for that. We also just put in the chat the Salesforce integration worksheet that Mary mentioned in the first part. So that's a really helpful checklist of things that you should be thinking about as you're implementing the integration. All right, I want to hang out just a few more minutes to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to enter their questions. So type away. Oh, and one last thing. So we are doing a raffle for a professional services package valued at $600 for anyone who attended any of the sessions today. So if you're here, you're in that raffle. So the odds are with you. We're going to be notifying the winner by email, I believe mid next week. So keep an eye out for that, as you could be the lucky winner. Yeah, and it could be Salesforce based, I'm not sure. So good luck with that. If you have any questions and you're typing them in, will you raise your hand? We'd be happy to ask them. If not, we know that it's Friday, and so everyone enjoys having a little extra time. So if you have a question and you're typing, raise your hand. If not, we might close the session. Just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to voice their questions. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any hands going up, so I guess we have all of our questions answered. So thank you so much, Mary, for sharing this knowledge with us. And thank you everyone for attending today's session, as well as the whole summit. This is going to conclude the summit. So thank you all so much and have a fantastic weekend.